Right now, over the Caribbean Sea, there's a cloud bigger than the entire continental United States. It's not made of rain, it's made of dust, blown 4,000 miles from the Sahara Desert. And while it hangs there, turning sunsets orange from Barbados to Miami, the ground underneath the Dominican Republic has been shaking over and over for the last 2 months. If you're picturing a beach vacation in Punta Cana right now, you need to know what's actually happening under your feet, and why the hurricanes that should be forming this week aren't showing up at all. Let's stack up what's real right now in one region. On August 3rd, 2026, a magnitude 4.5 earthquake hit near Sanchez, a town on the Samana Peninsula in the Dominican Republic, 10 kilometers deep, felt by people on the ground. That quake wasn't a one-off. Since June, the same general area near Punta Cana and Boca de Yuma has recorded shock after shock. 3.1, 3.3, 3.4, 3.7, 3.8, 4.0. Now, 4.5. Small on paper, persistent in real life. At the same time, a Saharan dust plume, one of several this summer, has been rolling across the Caribbean roughly every 5 to 7 days, thick enough to trigger air quality warnings in Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and Colombia, and the storms that are supposed to define this part of the calendar. By early August, the Atlantic had produced only 2 named storms. The 30-year average by that point in the season is closer to double digits worth of storm activity building toward it. No hurricanes, no major hurricanes, just tropical waves rolling off Africa and fizzling out. And it's not just those 3 headline items. Marine forecasters have also been flagging near-gale winds pulsing through the central and southwestern Caribbean this month, strong enough that small boats have been told to stay in port. Offshore Colombia and in the Gulf of Venezuela, winds have actually reached gale force in some nights. None of that made national news. All of it happened in the same stretch of ocean, in the same handful of weeks. 3 systems. Same ocean, same summer. That's not a coincidence you'd expect, which is exactly why it's worth 20 minutes of your time. Here's the thing that makes this moment different from a normal August in the Caribbean. Any one of these 3, a minor quake swarm, a dust plume, a slow storm season, happens most years somewhere in the region and barely gets noticed outside of local news. Now, what's unusual is having all 3 line up in the same weeks over the same water, loud enough that marine forecasters, seismologists, and hurricane trackers were all issuing updates about the same general stretch of ocean within days of each other. That's the kind of overlap that either means nothing at all, 3 unrelated systems sharing a calendar by coincidence, or it means this region deserves a closer look than the headlines have given it so far. We're about to find out which. A quick gut check before we go further. If you had to pick just one of these 3 things to actually worry about, the shaking ground, the mystery dust, or the missing storms, which would it be? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to know the second that fault line near Punta Cana does anything bigger, hit subscribe, because we're going to be tracking it long before it hits the news. Let's start with the ground, because that's the part that scares people the most, and the part most people understand the least. If you've ever flown into Punta Cana, San Juan, or Santo Domingo, you've flown over one of the most geologically busy stretches of ocean floor on the planet. And almost nothing about the view from the window gives that away. From above, it's just turquoise water and white sand. Underneath, it's a boundary zone where entire continents' worth of rock are locked in a slow-motion collision that's been running for millions of years and isn't going to stop this century, this decade, or this news cycle. The Caribbean isn't sitting on one solid piece of rock. It's sitting where 3 giant slabs of the Earth's crust, called tectonic plates, think of them as puzzle pieces that make up the planet's outer shell, grind past and under each other. The North American plate and the Caribbean plate meet right along a curve that runs from Cuba, past the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, and down through the Lesser Antilles. Imagine 2 rough concrete slabs being dragged past each other under a parking lot. They don't slide smoothly. They catch, they stick, they build up stress, and then they slip all at once. And that slip is what you feel as an earthquake. It's worth zooming out for a second because the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico aren't an isolated hotspot. They're one segment of a much longer active boundary. Follow that same curving plate edge further southeast, past the Virgin Islands, and down through the Lesser Antilles island chain, and you're tracking one of the most seismically active zones in the entire Caribbean. Even so, few earthquakes along that whole southeastern arc have topped magnitude 7.0 in the past century. The one clear exception sits far back in history. Guadeloupe, February 8, 1843, an earthquake estimated above magnitude 8.0, among the largest ever recorded to strike this part of the world. That event is a reminder that hasn't happened in the past century doesn't mean can't happen. It means the historical record includes exactly the kind of event scientists are now watching for along the Puerto Rico segment of the same general boundary. Along this particular stretch, near the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, something extra is happening. The North American plate isn't just sliding sideways past the Caribbean plate. It's also diving underneath it, like a shovel sliding under a stack of bricks. That's called subduction, and it's what carved out the Puerto Rico Trench, one of the deepest points in the entire Atlantic Ocean, plunging more than 5 miles down. Because one plate is diving under the other at an angle, earthquakes here don't just happen on the surface. They also happen deeper down, inside the plate that's being pulled under, anywhere from 40 to nearly 200 miles beneath the seafloor. That's why you'll see earthquake reports from this area listing depths of 70, 90, even 130 kilometers. Those are quakes happening on the sinking slab itself, not right at the surface. It helps to picture the whole boundary as one long curving zipper running underneath the ocean floor. Starting near Cuba, that zipper is mostly a sideways sliding boundary, the kind where the plates scrape past each other without much diving involved. That's the type of fault that produced the powerful 2020 quake we'll get to shortly. But as you follow that zipper east, past the Dominican Republic and toward Puerto Rico, the angle changes. The plates stop sliding cleanly past each other and start colliding at more of an angle, which is exactly where subduction, one plate diving under the other, takes over. That shift in geometry is why the earthquakes near the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico look so different on paper from quakes elsewhere in the Caribbean. Different depths, different patterns, different long-term risks. Now walk through this summer's timeline with that picture in mind. In late February, a small 3.4 magnitude quake hit north of Punta Cana. Nothing unusual. This region produces small quakes constantly. Then in June, activity picked up. June 14th, a 3.1 magnitude event 46 kilometers northeast of Punta Cana. June 15th, a 3.4 magnitude quake near Punta Cana itself. June 23rd, another 3.1. Through July, the same general patch of ocean produced a 3.2, a 3.3 at 77 kilometers deep, a 3.7 at 89 kilometers deep, a 3.4 at 71 kilometers deep, a 3.8 at 131 kilometers deep, and a 4.0 magnitude quake near Las Terrenas. Then, on August 3rd, at just after 5 a.m. local time, the biggest one yet, magnitude 4.5, centered right at Sanchez on the Samana Peninsula, only 10 kilometers underground, shallow enough and strong enough to be clearly felt by people asleep in their homes. Picture a fishing town on a peninsula, most of its residents still in bed before sunrise, the floor and the windows shaking just enough to jolt everyone awake at once. Phones lighting up seconds later, with the first shaky videos and messages asking if everyone felt that too. No injuries were reported. No buildings came down. But for a few seconds that morning, an entire town on the Samana Peninsula found out, all at the same moment, that the ground under their homes is still very much alive. Look at that list again. It's not one earthquake. It's a slow drumbeat, months long, climbing in places and dipping in others, spread across a zone that includes some of the most visited beaches on the planet. Puerto Rico's own seismic network has been the one logging most of these because this is their backyard. A reminder that the instruments picking up tremors near the Dominican Republic often sit across the Mona Passage in Puerto Rico, because seismic monitoring in this region is a shared cross-border effort along one continuous fault system. Here's the part that should make you sit up. Seismologists studying this exact stretch of plate boundary have said the Puerto Rico subduction zone is capable of producing a megathrust earthquake, the kind where a huge patch of locked plate boundary lets go all at once, unleashing a quake far bigger than anything in this current swarm. And there hasn't been a confirmed event like that here in the past 100 years. Not because the risk went away, because the stress has been building the whole time, mostly quietly, occasionally announcing itself with a 4.5, like the one on August 3rd. Keep in mind who's actually standing on this ground while all of this happens. Punta Cana alone draws millions of visitors a year, most of them checking into beachfront resorts built directly along the coastline, closest to this exact fault system, usually without a second thought about what's happening a few dozen kilometers offshore and a few dozen kilometers down. That's not a reason to cancel a trip. Small earthquake swarms like this one happen regularly in seismically active regions worldwide without turning into disasters. It's simply the honest context missing from most vacation guides. The beach and the fault line are the same piece of geography. And this summer, both have been active at once. Now, while the ground has been doing this, a completely different system has been rolling in from thousands of miles away. Every summer, hot, dry air rises off the Sahara Desert in North Africa, picks up enormous amounts of fine dust, and gets carried west by upper-level winds across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Meteorologists call this layer of dusty air the Saharan air layer. Picture it like a giant dry blanket sitting a mile or two above the ocean surface, drifting steadily westward for a week or more at a time. This year, that blanket has been unusually persistent. Back in late May, a plume described as covering an area comparable to the size of the entire continental United States rolled across the Atlantic and settled over the Caribbean. Puerto Rico braced for a denser pass on June 1st and 2nd. The Cayman Islands got hit days later. Jamaica's health ministry issued public warnings. Northern Colombia, the Magdalena, Bolivar, and San Andres areas got dusted too. And this wasn't a one-time event. Forecasters said new plumes were rolling off Africa every 5 to 7 days, like waves hitting a beach one after another, all summer long. By early August, satellite data was still tracking fresh dust surges moving across the Caribbean and up toward Florida and the Gulf Coast. If you've been in the Caribbean this summer and the sky looked more white-gray than blue, or the sunset looked unusually deep orange, that's not pollution from a nearby city. That's Saharan sand, floating a mile over your head, having crossed an entire ocean to get there. Think about what that actually means for a second. Grains of dust that were sitting on the ground in North Africa, in some cases, dust that hasn't moved in decades, got picked up by wind, carried 5 miles into the sky, and then rode a river of moving air for roughly a week, nonstop until they were drifting over a beach in the Dominican Republic or settling as a thin film on a car windshield in Kingston, Jamaica. Health officials in Jamaica specifically told the public to limit time outdoors during the thickest passes because the fine particles in Saharan dust can aggravate asthma and other breathing conditions, especially in children and older adults. In Colombia, forecasters tracked the plume specifically toward the San Andres and Providencia island chain, since dust doesn't respect borders any more than a hurricane does. It just follows the wind. None of this is brand new science either. Researchers who study African dust particles arriving in the Western Caribbean have been chemically analyzing exactly what's in these plumes. Minerals, trace metals, even microorganisms that survive the multi-day trip across the Atlantic riding along on individual dust grains. This isn't a mystery event nobody has studied before. It's a well-documented recurring feature of the tropical Atlantic every summer. What made this year's outbreaks notable wasn't that they happened. It's how frequently and how densely they kept arriving, wave after wave, for months in a row. And this wasn't a single event that came and went. It was a pattern. Outbreak after outbreak, roughly once a week, all the way from late May into August. Some passes were thin and barely noticeable except in satellite images. Others were dense enough to turn the sky the color of old newspaper and drop visibility noticeably at ground level. By early August, meteorologists were still tracking fresh dust surges, pushing not just into the Caribbean, but continuing on toward Florida and the Gulf Coast. Which means, if you live anywhere in the southeastern United States, some of those unusually hazy orange-tinted evenings this summer trace back to the exact same African dust that was drifting over Punta Cana days earlier. And here's where the third piece connects, the part almost nobody puts together. That same dry, dusty air is one of the reasons this hurricane season has been so unusually quiet. By early August 2026, the Atlantic Basin had produced just 2 named storms. The 30-year average pace calls for roughly 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes across a full season. And by the time you reach the first week of August, that average is already well underway. Not one hurricane had formed yet this year, not one. Forecasters pointed to strong El Niño conditions as the main driver, a pattern in the Pacific Ocean that changes wind patterns worldwide and tends to shear apart developing storms in the Atlantic before they can organize. On top of that, all that Saharan dust dries out and stabilizes the air a storm would need to grow in. Both Colorado State University's Seasonal Outlook and other major forecasting centers had already flagged, back in May and again in July, that this season was tracking well below normal. This isn't a surprise researchers stumbled into after the fact. It's a pattern they saw coming months in advance. Tropical waves were still rolling off Africa right on schedule. One wave near 24 degrees west, another near 49 degrees west, a third crossing the eastern Caribbean near 68 degrees west in early August. That third wave actually swept across the eastern Caribbean, bringing scattered showers and gusty winds to islands in its path, and for a moment looked like it might be the season's next real threat. It wasn't. It kept moving west, lost whatever structure it had been building, and dissolved into just another patch of clouds and rain. Wave after wave has followed the exact same script all summer. Form off Africa, cross the Atlantic, reach the Caribbean, and fail to become anything more than a rainy day.